Before we move on and talk more about Hibernate's architecture, I want to briefly talk about how Hibernate relates to JPA. JPA stands for the Java Persistence API and is a specification of a common persistence API for Java. JPA itself is not a framework, but a specification that a framework can implement to be considered JPA compatible. You can think of JPA like a Java interface and Hibernate like a class that implements that interface. So what then is the purpose of JPA? Well, JPA is an abstraction layer over a specific implementation of persistence in Java, so it allows you to write Java code that uses JPA interfaces, which can work with any persistence framework that implements the JPA spec. In other words, if you write an application using only JPA interfaces for your persistence, you could swap out Hibernate at some point with another ORM, theoretically without changing any code. Now, this is great if you're planning on switching out your ORM framework or you need this kind of flexibility. But in practice, I found that most software projects rarely try to switch out an ORM or even the underlying database technology. So there are two reasons why in this course we'll be covering using Hibernate through the Hibernate APIs instead of JPA APIs. First, as you can see in this diagram, Hibernate is more than just JPA. There are plenty of non-JPA things in Hibernate which are quite useful. Unless you have a really good reason to limit yourself to just what JPA can do, I don't see the point in restricting yourself to just JPA. We might as well use the Hibernate API and get the full power of Hibernate. Second, since this course is about Hibernate and not about JPA, it makes more practical sense to cover Hibernate. Since if you're using JPA, it doesn't matter what underlying technology you're using once you know how to get it set up. Don't worry though, if you want to use JPA in your application, you'll find that a great deal of how JPA works and even the API is very similar to Hibernate anyway, since JPA was heavily influenced by Hibernate.